should. Yeah, so and then we'll be able to, I've got the other screen as well, so I can see.
Okay, so I think we're live, are we?
Yeah, oh yes, there's some participants, so yes, and I've got on my screen it's working. Brilliant. So we've got a few people coming, so well, welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. This is our first meeting, and we are going to try to see if we can work out a good format for discussing radical feminist perspectives and sort of theory and ideas that are coming out of radical feminism. We're using the Women's Human Rights Campaign platform, and if you have any ideas or want to email, you can email info@womensdeclaration.com, and then we can share the ideas. The plan is that Julia Long, who's here, will host, and I'm going to hand over to her in a second, will host every other meeting, and that we're hoping to find other women who are interested in sort of anchoring this and helping us develop this space where we can talk about radical feminist perspectives. We're recording this, and the intention is that we'll make it public on YouTube, but we're not going to live stream it. So at the moment, this is just being recorded, but we do intend to publish it. As I think you'll know about, you can chat, and we can get involved in that. And I think that's all I have. So I'm just really, and I'll explain why I'm interested. I talked to Julia about. I'm interested in doing this because I'm really upset that academia excludes radical feminist ideas and voices and theory, and that if you are a young or a newcomer to feminism and you look on the academic JSTOR or Google Scholar, you find pretty much nothing that has been written from our perspective. They've sort of just hidden it all. So then you go and find all this liberal feminist unhelpful ideas, and it's very, very difficult to access this fantastic body of work that we've done of thinking and writing and developing ideas together and sometimes individually. We've actually produced loads of incredibly important ideas and scholarship and perspective and political theory. And from what I can see, you're not allowed to talk about it in schools. You can't talk about it in academia. The media definitely don't talk about it, mainstream media. So where our voices are really silenced. And my feeling is if we can set up this and we can share and record it, then we might be able to get our voices out. So sort of that's fine. Anyway, I'm really pleased that Julia's here and going to sort of host this and some of the weeks and bring her perspectives and bring together lots of, share with us lots of the knowledge that she's built up over many, many, many years. So as many of you know, Julia is Dr. Julia Long and did a PhD and worked in academia and by all rights should be a senior professor at a major university teaching everybody about her fantastic ideas and the knowledge she knows about. But of course, which she can't because academia just completely make it impossible for her to speak. That's my understanding of it. Anyway, over to you, Julia, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Jo. Thanks. Hi, greetings everybody. I'm just glimpsing down, having a quick look at everyone saying hello. So yeah, welcome everyone. I hope for those of us in this country anyway, it's sort of mid-morning on Sunday, so I hope everyone who needs it has got their cup of coffee with them. I'm not, I haven't always really been a morning person, so, so I'm quite impressed myself to be here at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Yeah, so I guess to begin with, I'd like to say I really, really support Jo's initiative in thinking that this is really necessary. I think, yeah, it's very apparent even for those of us who are kind of still within, broadly speaking, feminist, even radical feminist sort of circles and environments, that there's just been really quite a terrifying amnesia about, well, it's a bit more sort of purposeful than just amnesia, but about the really wonderful radical feminist work that's been written. And there are just, there are really very, very limited or no platforms to share that knowledge and to kind of keep those ideas alive and to build on them, unless we create these spaces for ourselves. So I think I'm really pleased to be involved in it, and I'd be interested in as well. I must admit, whenever we have these kind of things, I can never pay attention to what's going on the screen and also what's going on in the chat, but I'm sure Joe and I will have a look after. So if anyone's got particular ideas and topics and thoughts of, or women that they want to involve, or they think should be involved, I'd be really interested to hear what kinds of things that we all we all want this initiative to cover. I'd like it to be fairly informal in approach, mainly because it is on a Sunday morning, and I don't want to feel that pressure on a Saturday night that I've got to hugely prepare for something. So, and also I just think it's nice to create a kind of environment where we all feel that we can share our knowledge and ideas and understandings and new ideas with each other. I don't want it to in any way feel like a burden, that for women who may be fairly new to radical feminism to feel, oh my goodness, there's so much to read and I don't know where to start and I haven't got any time, and I'll never get through all this literature. I really want it to be something that hopefully feels exciting and something really useful and valuable to all of us. In that, I remember some of my most exciting times years ago, if I can remember back this far, when I was at university, and reading things that just seemed to me to open a whole new window on the world and a whole new way of understanding things, looking at things. So so I hope that it will be something that we find galvanizing and exciting, and certainly not in any way a kind of pressure to go and read lots of things as some kind of homework. And I'm aware as well that we've all had different opportunities in terms of access to feminist philosophy, feminist analysis, and I think I'm quite conscious that sometimes these situations can create a kind of status that some women are supposedly experts and others aren't, and I really don't want this to become in any way hierarchical or about status, or oh, I don't have as much knowledge as this woman. I really would like it to be something that we all share together. And I think if we think about the very unequal world that we inhabit, a lot of the world's population of women are illiterate, have never had access to books and literature. A lot of this, the kind of writings that we're going to be talking about, has only been published in English. So there are all kinds of reasons why these ideas wouldn't necessarily have been accessible. And I think it's really important to, as I say, to share as much as possible, to help to create access to ideas that I find really important and useful to us all.
I mean, I would add to that, Julia, that I think that fits really in with a lot of radical feminist writing, is that we tend to write in ways that are very accessible, unlike some of this sort of postmodernist, liberal feminists, very obfuscating and obscure language that's like Judith Butler. You find it very difficult to understand what she's talking about. And then that alienates loads of women. And also, even if you have been in academia for years, it's still impossible to understand a lot of the time because it's nonsense. But a lot of women might not know it's nonsense. And I think one of the things I love about radical feminist writing is it's almost always incredibly accessible to everyone. It's just really straightforward, simple language, and you don't have to have been to university and you can read it in a second language most of the time. So that's a great thing. And I suppose that's part of our tradition, isn't it?
Yeah, that clarity and sharing. But even so, I think for something to be accessible, for a start, you have to know that it exists, and you have to know where to seek it out. And so I think even if the writing is usually I agree, usually very clear and accessible to those who can read and those who can read in English. It's also, there are issues of, when I think of my mother, for example, until I kind of started discovering some of the radical feminists, there was no way she would even have known that they existed. And so I think there are all kinds of reasons why certain ideas and
yeah, I mean, in a way, we have got a really good route in at the moment with that word TERF, although it's a slur. Quite a lot of young women when they're thinking that transgender ideology is nonsense, they look at that word and they've heard of radical feminism and then they start looking for it. So I think in a way, we've got a bit of an opportunity right now because they're signposting, transgender activists are signposting anyone who doesn't agree with it to us, which is great. So
we thought of it that way, but yeah, it does have the radical feminist in there.
Maybe we should, when we put this on YouTube, we should say something like TERFs are good, or so like all the tags should be TERFs, so loads of people find us, and then say, but what really is it?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not but anyway, so do feel free, everyone, to share ideas. We can work out a program of different. I don't know what we want to call them. They're not really webinars, are they? Just sessions, I guess, online sessions. And also, I think we might want to have a bit more of a think about the timing of it. Now, I'm not an expert in international time zones, and I don't really know who's likely to be wanting to access these. These will go on YouTube as recordings anyway, but in terms of accessing the live events, I think at the moment this certainly it's got certain advantages having it this time for women in the UK, in Europe, and also in Australia. But I'm aware that it's the middle of the night for women in America, sort of different times in the night there, and as to other parts of the world, I'm really not sure. But again, I think that it's going to be difficult to have it consistently at a time that will suit everyone. But maybe that's something that we can have more of a think. Joe, before we continue, I've noticed Bernadette's raised her hand. I'm just wondering if there's any technical issues.
Yeah, she's probably complaining about the tech. Bernadette.
Is there? Do you want to say in the chat?
Let's make her.
If there's any.
No, she hasn't. She hasn't got her hand up.
I saw right at the beginning she'd raised her hand, and I saw it again. And I was thinking, oh, there's maybe no one can even hear us, and there's anyway. So having said all that, shall we get started?
Yeah.
Today's session. So yes, I thought it would be nice to begin with a conversation with Jo about the rather brilliant essay that she recently published on Substack, and I'm sure we'll put a link in the. I don't know. Can we put a link in the chat?
I think I can put it in. I'll try.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So just while
done it.
Because I think this brilliant essay of Jo's that she published recently really kind of, in a way, sets a kind of framework for the future discussions of the kinds of things we want to talk about, because not only do you build on radical feminist work, refer back to it, but then you also introduce what I found a really interesting and definitely thought-provoking new idea, a kind of new take on it, or a way of using that theory applied to our current situation, which I found really, as I say, really thought-provoking and really stimulating. So I know hopefully there'll be some women here who've who've had the chance to read it, but I'm sure also there'll be some who haven't. So I was really interested to ask you, Jo. First of all, I think you've definitely been hiding your light under a bushel, because I haven't, unless I've missed things, I haven't seen any other writings by yourself, but I know you spend a lot of your time doing absolutely brilliant organizing and a really sort of dedicated organization of the WHRC webinars. So I've known you more in that capacity, and then I see this this fantastic piece of writing from you. So I'd like to ask you, have you done much other writing, and what in particular inspired or motivated you to write this piece?
Well, I wrote something in the 1990s, a sort of feminist piece, and I showed it to some of my friends, and they said it was self-indulgent. And so I thought I'd better not write anything else. But I actually think it was probably quite good. But then the reason they thought it was self-indulgent is in that way that Mary Daly talks about the self, us trying to look. And I was actually focused on our inner radical feminist selves, and they didn't like that. So that put me off a bit. And then I wrote some very, very, very rubbishy golf stories, because I've, for my sins, played golf in my life, and it was so boring that after a while, talking to the people, I thought I'm going to actually write about it. And that was interesting, because I was writing for female golfers. And so I was writing in another voice, not telling our truths, our radical feminist truths. And I was a little bit, but it was, I mean, it is really not very good. But it was the thing I wrote was a bit complicated about cheating and why people cheat. And there were 4 different women cheating on the golf courses in a variety of ways. But it was basically just, in a way, rubbish. And but at least I wrote it, and it was quite long, and I published it, and that was on Amazon Prime and stuff like that. And then recently I have written a couple of things. I've written something that's on the 4W called A New Operating System. So it's making this analogy that if the system was like an iPhone or a phone, and while we're asleep, we get upgrades on the phone. What my argument was gender doctrine, gender identity ideology, is just a new operating system to fix the glitches in the patriarchal system. So there are a lot of glitches. It was breaking down. So it was like a bad app. It wasn't that, like, the phone wasn't working, patriarchy wasn't working. So gender ideology, gender doctrine is a new operating system, and it's just being installed as long as we do nothing. That was the analogy. And then this thing I wrote, the reason I wrote it is because I read this book. I read this book in the 90s. It was written by Carol Pateman, The Sexual Contract. It's fantastic. And then I was talking to Sheila Jeffries who has also read it and thinks it's fantastic. And I'm very keen on her new book coming out, which I think is going to be called Penile Imperialism. And I think Sheila's here. So I just as a little sideline, I think that it might turn out well while we're doing this, that we work out some way of getting more women onto this panel thing. So we don't just necessarily need 2 of us. We might work out that 4 of us, or more, or many of us, maybe all of us could come. We could promote everyone to panelists, but I just don't understand what we should do with it. But anyway, what Carol Pateman says is that all this idea of the social contract, which was written by Rousseau and Hobbes and Locke and updated by Rawls in recent times, political philosophers didn't tell the other half of the story, the one half of the story. And in this sort of blast of radical feminist insight and work, Carol Pateman shows absolutely perfectly how the social contract in public sphere is based upon the sexual contract. It's so the concept of the individual or the brother in brotherhood, those free individuals in democracy, is based upon having a woman who has been exploited or is being exploited or will be exploited in lots of different ways and is subordinate. So she unpicks the whole thing.
Mhm.
And what's brilliant about the book is she explains how a lot of our current politics is understood by people in society and by politicians as a social contract. She just says it's a political fiction and it's not true. And so I explain in my essay that loads of people have criticized the social contract for being a political fiction. It's not true that you can just free individuals can make contracts and go ahead as if there were no dominance and structures of hierarchy and subordination. And then she updates it to say the sexual contract is there. And then at the end of her book, actually, which was written in 1988, she talks about men joining the category woman using gender, and she criticizes gender, but it's quite gently, but she does explicitly criticize, and I think she could see what was starting to happen. Now, she didn't write that much more. She wrote recently this book, Contract and Domination, which is much more up to date and has loads of very important points. Anyway, what she says is that it's just a sort of this whole idea of contract theory is a story that's told, and it creates the idea, and it's a nice story for people to think they are in control and consenting to the structures in patriarchy or in society. And it's very attractive, and it's also very useful for those in charge, because they'll say you chose this, you contracted into this, you chose to be a worker, or we're all free and equal, they say. And so she critiques the whole of contract theory, says we just shouldn't use it, and says liberal feminists have tended to use the ideas of contract and the freedom and the equality and aim for women to just join civil society as brothers, part of the brotherhood, which of course we know doesn't work. And so what I've done is updated it, including a lot of the concepts of gender identity theory, to say that I mean, the main point of the thinking, and there's so much more to be done. Once you start thinking like this, you think, wow, we could unpick absolutely masses. Is women used to be put in the home on the basis of our sex, and the contract that we made that made us consent was marriage, but we were really forced into it. So, and once we were in marriage, we left civil society and we became subject to nature again, a form of sort of outside society violence. And that's how male political philosophers and their handmaidens justified us not having the freedoms and the protection that was given to men, like you shouldn't assault somebody, whereas a man was allowed to assault his wife until in Britain 1988. So that used to be the thing. But then when we women got the vote and started joining civil society, it caused a problem with the sexual contract and the functioning of patriarchy, because there are too many women being given equality, liberty, and fraternity, but like brotherhood, but civil status. And we started destroying some of the structures that patriarchy wants, like freedom of access to women's bodies all over the place, at home, to have a woman at home to have sex with, and also as a sort of slave. And also in the workplace, the things, I mean, like a typical thing of men used to have, or in Britain, they used to have pornography in their workplaces, or more recently, men would just get away with just harassing and using sexually dominating women who in their workplaces through like all this Me Too movement. And that's all been breaking down a bit. And then also all the paedophilia stuff, like by us getting into the police and into schools, we women have undermined the protection racket that was going on and in the churches. All of that's been destroyed under the old sexual contract because we've got out, we're out. And my theory and my essay is that gender identity is a way of excluding our voices. What they want to do is they want the only people who are going to be allowed to be civil and be in civil society, be in the institutions and be in the structures of patriarchy, will be those who put their pronouns in and signify their subordinate status by a mini contract of gender saying, I'm female. And I sort of start to unpick that aspect that if in our understanding of gender being a form of patriarchal dominance, if men say, I'm biological male and I have the gender male, they're picking the gender master dominant. Whereas if we want to get a job, this is what I think they're trying to do. If we want a job in any of the structures, teacher, doctor, politician, media, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to pick the gender subservient. And it links up to Sheila Jeffreys writing about beauty and misogyny, that they really want women in the workplace, in public places, to be wearing the symbols of their oppression in makeup. So, I mean, there's so much in it. So I think it's a really interesting, fertile ground for us to look at.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I suppose just to kind of clarify what I was understanding from your sort of theorizing of this is that because, well, just to expand on it a little bit, because there's such a push to replace the, well, I don't even want to call it a concept of sex, but the reality of sex, to replace that understanding of us as a sexually dimorphic species, and you know, sex as referring to male and female, as referring to those biological reality, because there's been such a push to replace that with the word gender, which obviously there's a huge confusion about, I think, for a lot of people. And this is something I'd like to talk about with you, because you kind of question how much there is confusion or how much it's intentional. But just to kind of set that aside for a minute, because there has been such a push, a very, certainly in this context, a very successful push to replace the word sex with gender, and then to replace the understanding of that now with the normalization of, first of all, the word trans, but now we're starting to see also the word cis, that then if you're ticking this box that says gender, and there's not just going to be just male or female, it's probably going to be at least 3 or maybe, you know, more than that to tick, that if you then tick female, if you're not a man who's ticking that, then the understanding is that you are ticking that box as a so-called cisgender woman, which means that you are happy in this social role of basically femininity. So is that what you're saying, that and that's where this new kind of gender contract, that's at the heart of this gender contract, is that you are then signing up to, I'm happy with this social role, because otherwise I would have transitioned and been non-binary, or I would have been a trans man. Is that?
Yeah, and I think it's part of how, like, I refer to a book by Chomsky and someone else, I can't remember his name. They come up with, or they talk about the idea of manufacturing consent, that in democratic societies, you have to spend a lot of energy getting people to consent to the horrific inequality and the unfairness. And so a lot of time is spent, and they unpick it typically for male political philosophers, as if we're all men, or just ignoring us. And what I think is there was always a sexual contract going on, and there was always a manufacturing of our consent, formally or by the marriage contract. But now we're not doing that, and we're undermining the deal that men had. This is a way of getting loads and loads of women to sign up to their own oppression. And I suppose I think it's useful for us to look at it in this structural term, this sort of top-down term, in the way that, say, Marxists look at economics, and they tell the story. They decide to say that exploitation and not ownership of the means of production is a key site of political struggle and a way we should think about it. And I think us looking in that broad term at the whole functioning of the system can show us some of the things that are happening. Like, what I've noticed is quite a lot of this debate, that's this struggle we're in at the moment, is framed from the individual's point of view. Like, it's not nice for a woman to go into a changing room. Like, it's not nice for me in my town. Marks and Spencer's have got a men's changing room and a gender neutral changing room. That's what they've done now. That's not nice for me, but that's how most of our political discussion has been, about how we experience it. Whereas if you look at the whole system, then you can see the stuff that other things that are going on to do with new opportunities and new deals. So we can have a new social contract, which involves not talking about sex again. And I think that what they were saying, sort of liberal feminists have said, and a lot of women initially thought, is if we can get out of the home and we can get the vote, we can get civil equality in society, we can then be free as men. And what we're finding is that's absolutely not the case. They won't let us be, and they want us to signify our subordination. And if we don't, we won't be able to work. Like Maya Forstater case, it's not worthy of respect in a civil society. And it's so interesting because that's linked up to political philosophy.
Sorry, yeah. Obviously that at least has been overturned, but it's a fairly, it's a fairly minimal kind of gain, isn't it? Like, just the fact that, to recognise that there's a biological difference between men and men is worthy of respect is such a surreal concept. Anyways, but anyway, just to sort of be clear about that.
But yeah, I mean, one of the things is that comes from the whole tradition of political philosophy. So the original male social contract theorists said that, and even Roman philosophers said this, that if you submit graciously, you will be worthy of you will be given a worthy job in the structure, in civil society. So if you submit and say, yes, I agree with this, I submit, then you're going to be worthy of respect. So what's interesting is that this is playing out, these weird things that you'd think, why did he say those words, not worthy of respect? It's it's been written about for hundreds of years. You have to submit to the system in order to, and to the hierarchy, in order to be given a job, a worthy job. She would be allowed to work in Tesco's on the checkout, because that's not one of the sort of structures of recreating patriarchy, the ideological structures.
Although I'm not so sure, actually, Jo. I'm not so sure there is any job that women can do if you object to, if you refuse to participate in this pretense that men are women. So say if you're, I don't know, if you're working in Tesco's, or if you're working in Marks and Spencer's, or somewhere where there's changing rooms, and you misgender someone, or I'm not so sure anything. I really don't know that there's any job actually that you can be doing where if you refuse to participate, that you will be allowed to keep that job. I'm really not so sure, actually.
Maybe there is some sort of...
With the higher status jobs, it becomes apparent kind of, more immediately and more dramatically. But I'm really not so sure that, I don't think there's any space now in the public domain where women can earn a living and be basically safe from being hounded out.
I mean, my experience is you can, because I work as a gardener on 1 day a week, and it's very different life, and it's like it just, none of the rules apply. It's really completely non-governed. Like there are no inspectors. They say there are rules, but basically there aren't. You can just basically do what you want. So loads of people break the laws in terms of pesticide application and not wearing the right equipment and not paying taxes, and they're outside society. So I think maybe you're right about big structures, but I think further out in that sort of non-formal economy, in the informal economy, you can, I think nobody, it's just not an issue.
But then that's interesting, kind of, because I wanted to ask you a bit more. Well, I wanted to discuss with you a bit more about some of the key concepts, both of Carol Pateman's book and obviously that you've used in your essay. And I think that touches on it, because what you're talking about there in terms of sort of employment opportunities is really, again, looking in a way at this distinction between the public domain and the private domain. So if you're kind of getting employment through more private sort of channels, whether as a, informally as, I don't know, a cleaner or a gardener or, something like that, and maybe there's a bit more survivability there rather than the sort of public, more formalized kind of structures. And I was thinking in terms of Pateman's work on the social contract, that I think one of the really useful things that she does is to spotlight this, the way that the patriarchy is based on this division between the private and the public. So the public is the realm of these all these different social contracts, and the notion that they are based on kind of on some sort of equality and consent to some degree, and then with women being relegated to the private domain. And obviously that's historically kind of how patriarchy has worked. And it reminded me of Sylvia Warby's distinction between public patriarchy and private patriarchy. And I agree with what you're saying about the fact that since the women's liberation movement, that women then have been gaining access to the public domain in ways that they had to really fight for, and that hadn't been possible before. But our participation in that public domain certainly isn't on the same terms as men's participation in the public domain. But and I see what you're saying about some of the changes that have been made in terms of maybe like equality legislation, or I was thinking about like Claire Short's campaign back in the 80s to, against page 3, and the fact, as you say, that, there used to be in male-dominated workplaces, maybe these like pornographic calendars on the wall or page 3 opened. And then you talk about the fact that women have come into the workplace, how that's changed that. But I'm wondering, really, I'm not sure if I do see what you mean. And I think, yeah, obviously it has made some really significant changes, but also because it seems to me that patriarchy has kind of shape-shifted, and I'm not so sure that that it certainly hasn't been a kind of a linear progression, has it? Because
what's happened, let's say, about paedophilia in schools, that in the last say 10 years, it's very, very difficult to get access to children if you're a paedophile, and within the church as well, and within youth clubs. There was a you know, as from our campaigning and the fact that we're there in the police forces, there are women there in the police forces saying, yeah, let's actually prosecute these guys, or we've got evidence, let's do it. There are women teachers who are saying, yes, we should actually stop this guy being a paedophile. And of course, there might be a few men who have also helped. I'm sure there are a few, but that's been taken away from the men who want to have that access. And that's, let's say, for 10 years, that's that route of getting access to children in the public sphere, in guides, in football teams and school. And I think what this gender contract or this gender identity doctrine does is it shifts back, that it's going to open up that possibility again very quickly, and it's starting to already. So what is happening is that the women who argue against that in schools, in any of these institutions, are being expelled, like the guides, the Katie Alcock, who was expelled from the guides, and Helen Thigbob, who was expelled from the guides in Britain, because they were standing up for women's safeguarding. So I definitely don't think, I think that we made some progress, and it's going to go backwards now, and is already going backwards. And it's going backwards. And the mechanism, they're not saying, Katie, you have to go home and not have a job. They're saying, Katie, or, you know, you can't, or women teachers, they want us to carry on being in the workplace. They want us to carry on working, but they want to stop us talking about women as a sex class. So that goes back under, before Carol Pateman opened it up. So we're all going to be talking about the social contract again, as if there was no sex class, because you can't talk about sex because that's transphobic. So they're like, I agree, it's shape-shifting, but they're going to regain the territory that they had and make it impossible for us to talk about, unless we win this fight. But they're trying to make it impossible for us to talk about. And the only people who will get into positions of authority in these key structures of professions and structures of patriarchy will be the ones who submit to gender identity ideology, which is just, yeah. And then it means we can't talk about sex.
Yeah, no, I think your thesis about the gender contract actually is absolutely brilliant, and it just makes a lot of sense to me. I suppose all I'm thinking is I don't think that we've, like, in terms of women entering you know, the different professions and increasing safeguarding, like, there has been that that development, but at the same time, hasn't just, most of it has just gone online and then really expanded online. Because if we look at things like, you know, the, you know, men sharing images of child sexual abuse, it's completely exploded. I remember a conference, oh gosh, it's probably best part of 10 years ago now. I was at some kind of like safeguarding type conference, and I remember sitting next to a female detective inspector in the police, and she was telling me then, and probably most of us know this now, it's been covered quite a bit on, you know, TV documentaries and things. She was saying that the problem of men sharing images, accessing and sharing images of child sexual abuse was completely off the scale, and it was her job to try to prosecute some of them. And she said at that point, she reckoned there was probably at least one offender in every street in the country. And obviously, yeah, it said at least one in every street. I don't really know how that stacks up, if women might think it's more or less than that, but to me that's a pretty large number of men who are doing, you know, these terrible things. And she said obviously they had nowhere near the capacity to actually address that. So she would go in and she would have these lists and lists and lists of all these men that they'd identified as downloading, you know, these images, or sharing them or providing them or whatever. And she would basically, you know, almost like put a pin in the list and think, okay, well, we'll go after this one today. So that has been exploding as well. And in terms as well of even, because I think like even before we get to this stage of this gender contract, obviously we've also had the explosion of online pornography and the global sex industry and, you know, all of this. And there has been this whole language, as we all know, of consent around that. And that, what I think has been really troubling, you know, because so obviously the kind of the feminist structural analysis of men's organization of all of that has been marginalized, and we have all this rhetoric around, well, women only do this because they consent to do this, so they want to do it. And what I do find really troubling is the way, and I think that your essay is so useful and helpful in shining a spotlight on, is the way in which a lot of the terms that you are showing are such a problem have also been used within feminism. I'm not even just talking about the sort of lib fem, but even within maybe quite radical feminist, or certainly more of a kind of radical feminist.
Yeah, I mean, what Pateman says, which is really useful, is she says consent is a political fiction, and that the social contract is a political fiction that is there to persuade citizens to be part of it's just a story, but it's not true. And she says that one of the key things, which is really interesting when you unpick it, she says, you can't a thing is there's this idea of being able to sell your labor, and there's this thing of she calls property in the person, and which she says is a political fiction, and quite a lot of other critiques of contract theory, the more structural people like the Marxists and the anarchists, criticize property in the person. What property in the person, how it fits into contract theory, is apparently that contract theorists say that you can sell your labor and you own it. You're an individual and you own that labor and you sell it as a contract. So you would say, I'm going to sell you 3 of my hours, and you do that, and then you come out of it as a free individual, for liberty, fraternity, and equality. And you come out of it having sold 3 hours of your labor as a fully functioning part of an individual. But because it's all framed in terms of the brotherhood, you can see why it works for brothers, because they can sell their labor because they have male bodies. So if they go to work, they can wear normal clothes and they're respected and they're allowed to be just a laborer. Whereas we, because we have female bodies, are immediately meant to wear makeup. We're meant to show the signs of our subordination. Many women get sexually harassed, and because their female body is a body, often they get their contract, supposedly they're meant to be contracting in to do something that they take their body with them to, and that body often gets abused as a female body, like surrogacy, prostitution, or just sexual harassment in the workplace. That is, we are really. So what Pateman says is it's a political fiction that you can sell labor for 3 hours and come out of it as a free, equal individual. And she says it's much better, it's just a complete contract, that to talk about social contract, we should reject all of the ideas of contractarianism, and we need to talk about subordination, dominance and subordination. And that's what you actually get when you're selling your labor. You say, I'm going to be subordinate to your boss for the next 3 hours, and I'm basically going to do what he says. And then that's a very grey area, because some bosses absolutely exploit you, and you get exploited, or you're subordinate as a female, not as a male. So our experience of the contract in the workplace and in many other places is predicated upon us being female. And there's lots of other angles to it. And I think that that's really really one of the problems is if we go along with a story of the gender like drag queen story time, and the stories that they're trying to create a sort of social hegemony, that we understand the story of the choice of gender, and that children understand it because they're really obsessively teaching it to children. And drag queen storytime tells us they've outed themselves as they're trying to implement the story that goes with the structures of subordination and the new patriarchy. And I think that what I suppose we are trying to do is saying we don't believe in that story, and that story doesn't work. And by looking at it this way, we can see lots of little holes in the theory, and we can see also how it functions together to create to create new, this morphed, like you say, a sort of shape-shifted form of patriarchy that looks different. Oh, and the thing I sort of realized or noted, I thought was interesting, is that what Pateman says is that when you sign as a woman, if you sign let's say in the 19th century, you sign the marriage contract, there's this moment, that very, very short moment, when you're said to be, in terms of political theory, free, equal, and you give your consent. So you have that status for the moment you sign it. That's your big moment in life, is you've signed away. But legally they say you are free and equal, and you have full civil status. You sign it away, and then you go off into the home and you get beaten up and raped and blah, blah, blah. But you've chosen it. And you had that moment, that big moment of your marriage day when you signed away all of your rights. But that's a lovely moment, and it's a nice prospect to be treated as a full individual. What I think is that the moment you sign your gender, that's a mini contract, and that's one of the reasons why it feels empowering and it feels nice, because when someone says put your pronouns in, what they're doing is they're saying, we're giving you the choice, and we're giving you the respect to be a full civil person at that moment. Then you have the moment of freedom and liberty and equality and respect, and then you sign it away, and then you have chosen your subordinate status. And I think that might be one of the attractivenesses why young people, like say girls, they know that they're subordinate, they know they're going to be exploited, and then someone comes along and says, no, look, you can choose this, and they have a little think about it. But it's a glorious moment of freedom to do that choice. Or it seems like that, because somebody's saying, we believe you, and the state is saying it, and the TV is saying it. So I think that might be it. And some of those insights, I just think, thinking in these terms, you get these insights of like, oh my God, this is horrific.
I think that's a really brilliant insight, and I think it's because it's totally consistent with the whole kind of neoliberal ideology of this sort of myth of the autonomous individual who is kind of who exists independent of all the different kind of social and economic forces that we're all subject to. So that kind of myth that's obviously been very, very much promulgated in liberal feminism and so-called third wave feminism, that we are these individuals who are free to exercise our agency and make choices, and very much reliant on this idea of consent, that so much plays out with the whole transgender ideology of, yes, it's so much of it is about the authentic self, isn't it? This is your opportunity to express your authentic self. It's, I mean, the sort of the Orwellian doublespeak of using words like authentic when what it's actually referring to is the very opposite of because very often it involves, I don't know, maybe breast binding or taking hormones or all kinds of things that actually undermine any. I think there's a lot of problems with the word authentic anyway, these sort of romantic notions of authenticity, but I think that idea of asserting your pronouns, for that particular moment, if you have imbibed that ideology, there is this kind of, I guess, a fake sense of empowerment that, yes, I've asserted my authentic self in a way, rather than actually I've basically submitted to this.
Yeah, and I mean, you have the moment where you're being treated with respect when you write it, and then you've chosen your own subordination. But another thing that I think is oh no, sorry, I forgot it. I've lost the thing.
Hopefully
Yeah,
it'll come back.
it'll come back. Yeah.
Last sort of 5 minutes or so. But something else that I just wanted to discuss with you is, I mean, I think there's a bit of a danger of talking about these sort of social phenomena as a kind of in terms of like linear development, because obviously while we've got this new gender contract, really being implemented, or in the way that you were talking about, like using your kind of IT analogies, we've also still very much got the sexual contract in play, haven't we? There are, that whole kind of all of the sort of mythology and social approval that goes along with marriage and heterosexuality is still very much in play. So it's not as though one's kind of replaced the other.
No, I think definitely the sexual contract is still there, but we're not allowed to talk about it like we weren't before Carol Pateman wrote her book. So the political philosophers completely ignored it, that maybe they'd mention it in one sentence in each of their books. But we really, it was non-political, it was nature or whatever, God's will or whatever. Yeah. And now it's going to be transphobic, or it's going to be taboo. We're not allowed to talk about it. It's absolutely still there. Yeah. But the story we're going to be told is the gender contract. I've just remembered the thing I was going to say, which I found really interesting, was that I think the reason a lot of this has happened very, very quickly in institutions is that everybody pre-made this deal. Most of the women and many of the men, they've already done their deal with patriarchy. It's basically they've said, whatever deal, whatever story you want us to tell, the social contract or whatever, we're going to do that in return for being head teacher, or we're going to do it in return for being an academic. And they've already decided, when they were 20 to take that job, that they were the sort of person who was going to prop up patriarchy. And I think when they see it coming, they don't even have to think it through. They've already decided many years ago, like when they were 20, that they're going to implement the updates to patriarchal systems. And that's why I think it's so quick to get into loads of places. It's not that people don't understand it. Maybe they cognitively don't understand it, but they've already signed up to be the police officers to implement patriarchy in their professions. So all this is just the new tweak of the orders. That's why, I mean, I think that they might not consciously be able to talk about it like that, but I think they know in their bones which side they're on. And I think, how sometimes they say you can tell which way somebody's going to vote by how they react to a scary image on the telly. There was a scientific bit of research that some guy found that basically it's complete correlation between how you react to something terribly scary. It was in America. Depends whether you're going to be Republican or Democrat. I think probably there's stuff that decisions people have made before. Are you going to resist patriarchy, or are you going to fight it? And that's been done. That's why it's so quick, because people don't have to think this through. They already knew they were going to implement it. Again, I think
that's a really, really interesting kind of theory. And I suppose that once there's all kinds of, I don't know if it's quite as clean as that. Maybe it is for some, but I think once you're working in a particular context, I mean, let's think about those working in academia, there's huge pressures, there's huge pressure to publish, there's, huge administrative pressures, there's and then I suppose you'll have all your economic pressures that, I need to pay my mortgage, or I need to support my family, or I need to be doing all this, that, and the other. And so as things are kind of introduced, I think even if some people were kind of in more of a sort of resistance mode, I think we've seen any kind of resistance eroded so much over, you know, since the 1980s, I guess, at least.
Yeah.
You know, neoliberalism and, you know, the really the kind of decimation of, you know, struggles in the workplace, like the, you know, what the unions used to do, or I guess maybe to some extent they're still struggling to do, but you know, there's really been that undermining of kind of an idea of like workplace solidarity and, you know, all of that. So I think, yeah, once you're heavily invested in, you know, in a particular structure, obviously it's really, really difficult to then resist a certain part of it, because then what are you going to do? We see the consequences that, you know, in terms of, you know, you could lose your job, or you could be a pariah, and maybe you don't even allow yourself to get to the stage where you think in those terms of resisting. But I think it leads on to some really interesting and really kind of crucial questions, which maybe is something that we can think about in future sessions, that I think about all the time, and I don't know that we ever really get on to discussing, which is, well, how do we live then? Because obviously there is the question of economic survival. And I mean, when we were talking about the manufacturing of consent, you know, one of the most powerful ways of manufacturing that consent is to threaten people with destitution if they don't consent, you know, irrespective of all the ideology and the media and the advertising and everything else. You know, even those men who are offering to, you know, who are supposedly contracting their hours of labor, like none of it is a free choice, is it? Because obviously,
well, what Virginia Woolf said, I thought was very good in Three Guineas, is she said you should live as simply as possible and have get a job that you can make enough money to live on, like 3 days a week, and then spend the rest of the time resisting all the rest of the time. And I mean, Three Guineas is absolutely in the line of you know, this way of analysing things. But I thought that sounded like quite a good idea. Like, we have to survive, but then as soon as you've got enough money to live, you should then do all the rest of your time resisting.
Well, that's something I must say is definitely chimes with.
It's probably what, growing plants.
but even so, you know, for some, you know, given the situations of some, you know, really seriously economically disadvantaged women, you know, they could be working, you know, several low-paid jobs in order to feed their children, and, you know, quite how, to what extent you can opt out of that and live a simple life and do other things. I think again, it's only a sort of a narrow social sort of stratum of us that can even make that choice, I think. I'm really conscious of a couple of things. That basically we've come up to the hour. I wanted to say before I thank you, Jo, I really, even when I'm just watching these type of sessions, I can never concentrate on the chat and the speakers at the same time. So I haven't seen anything in the chat. So I'm sorry if questions were raised that we haven't addressed. But I've found it so interesting and really, really stimulating, both to revisit Carol Pateman's work and also to hear where you've taken it, Jo. So thank you so much. And as I say, I think maybe we'll have a bit of a think as to what we can do in the future and take on board maybe if there are some suggestions in the chat. I would be really open to doing that. But I mainly want to thank you, Jo, for a brilliant piece of writing. I hope that it's really inspired women to have a read of your essay and also to go back and read, you know, Carol Pateman's original thesis. And if we've done that, I think that's a great.
Well, I'd just like to say as well, in terms of this series, that hopefully this has been, I mean, this is just one way of us doing this. It could really be that women would prefer to have 4 of us on, or 7 of us, or something, some other number. And it might be that we discuss, you know, great writing, you know, sort of really interesting books. You might have something that you want to share, or So I think if there's ideas, if you send them to this info@womensdeclaration.com, then I can send them to Julia and others who are interested in hosting, because Julia won't be able to always do it. My sort of aim would be, I'm quite on for helping get this set up, but I'd quite like if others sort of looked after it in a while. So if anybody's sort of interested. And the other thing I just wanted to say is that one of the really good logics of having this early is it means Asia and Australia and New Zealand, all the feminists there can join. So that is a very good thing about it. So it might turn out that because I can see that there's Anna McCormack who is here, who maybe it would be great to get. So she's from Australia, who can't normally come to our normal the stuff we do. So that's one argument for having it now. But anyway, yeah, it's been a massive pleasure. I'm so excited. And I think there's to hear from everybody, from all of us, you know, about our ideas and books we like and ideas. It would just be an area, and then we can try and get those out to newcomers.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Jo, and thank you for that brilliant essay. I'm so pleased that you wrote that and shared it, and I think it's been the basis of well, what I found a really, really stimulating discussion. So yeah, thanks a million for that.
Brilliant. Okay, well, bye everybody.
And have a, whatever time zone you're in, have a great day or evening or night or afternoon.
Yeah, and if anybody can think of a good name, we could set up a new YouTube channel for these. Like, it could, I suppose, Radical Feminist Perspectives could be the name of that channel, but whatever. We'll develop that. Brilliant. Okay, bye, Julia. See you.
Bye.
Great. We're doing the same next week, same time next week. Okay. See you all then. Bye.